Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We aren't just looking at everyday data. We're actually going to act as historians unearthing an ancient, dusty, mythic scroll. What we're about to explore together is a forbidden history, a narrative that was meticulously kept from the general public by the very people who wrote the rules of our civilized world. It's the story of the lost magic of our realm and the entities who once authored it.
So, let's dive right into this grim, dark fable. Long before the rigid rules of our modern world were set in stone, the realm was actually governed by the three spirit siblings. They were known as the Living Ink. These were the primal authors of chaos, and they existed completely outside the world of men or monsters. They were literally the living embodiment of the world's most ancient, messy mischief.
Now, the core conflict here is absolutely essential to understanding this suppressed history. Think of it as a dramatic tale about freedom versus rigid order. It's like an unscripted play completely clashing with a strict manual. On one hand, you have the vibrant, unscripted play of the siblings' absolute freedom, a world painted with unpredictable, messy ink. And contrasted against this is the stifling, strict manual of order that monarchs and high sorcerers sought to rigidly maintain. It's the ultimate clash between untamed creation and suffocating control.
Section 1. Member profiles the Living Ink.
To really grasp why these primal forces of chaos were so deeply feared, we have to define their enemy. The siblings were born of the void, and their very existence was a fundamental, unwavering rejection of what's called static control. Static control was basically the obsession of the ruling class, this intense desire for rigid order and absolute unquestionable law. The siblings didn't just break these laws, their very nature proved that the laws themselves were just an illusion.
So let's meet our cast. Our primary subjects are the final sentinels of the spirit, the wit, the hunger, and the small. And each of them served a very specific, devastating function against the forces of order.
First up, we have the eldest, the wit. His primary function was the total dismantling of the ego. The ancient scrolls actually describe his presence incredibly vividly. They say he was marked by a smile that held far too many teeth for a mortal face. He didn't fight with swords or traditional weapons. Instead, he used laughter as a jagged blade, slicing straight through the silence of ancient stone and completely shattering the gilded cages of logic that the sorcerers built around themselves.
He was basically a terrifying mirror to the powerful. The wit specialized in stripping away the salve of illusion from anyone claiming unearned majesty. And he did this by literally weaving their deepest, darkest nightmares right into jokes. Just imagine being a high monarch, entirely convinced of your absolute supremacy, only to have your deepest insecurities laid totally bare and laughed at by an entity you can't even arrest or control. No wonder they hated him.
Then there's the second sibling, the hunger. Now, what's crucial to understand about him is that he completely bypassed the traditional desires of men. He was the consumer of expectations. He didn't want gold, he didn't care about thrones, and traditional power meant absolutely nothing to him. He acted as a catalyst for what the texts call the logic of the crucible, forcing reality to collapse into its own absurdity just to find the honest currency of the soul. Literally, all he wanted was to hear the sound of the sorcerer's expectations shattering. And finally, we have the small. The small represented the pure, unbinding power of the absurd. This sibling was literally the spark of unpredictable whim. In fact, the ancient records show that the small was responsible for transforming grim, imposing fortresses into surreal playhouses before the first laws of stasis were even fully drafted. The small proved, once and for all, that chaos just cannot be bridled by the very laws it was born to break.
Section 2. The struggle for reality.
You have to understand, this wasn't just a war of armies. It was a struggle for the very fabric of reality itself. The high sorcerers grew so deeply paranoid that they officially classified the siblings as arbiters of subversion. They lived in this intense, waking terror of the siblings' ability to take their precious absolute law and turn it into a contract written in disappearing ink. Literally nothing the sorcerers built was safe from being unmade.
And what made this so incredibly infuriating to the rulers of the realm was the siblings' perspective. Where the sorcerers saw tragedy and collapse, the siblings just saw a grand comedy. This wasn't malicious destruction. You really have to interpret their brand of chaos as a necessary, vital response to a rigidly suffocating world. They were essentially the pressure valve of reality.
Which naturally leads us to ask this massive question. Why did the masters of the world fear the Living Ink so deeply that they felt compelled to completely eradicate this unpredictable wonder from the world? I mean, why not try to understand it?
Section 3. The architecture of stasis.
The answer.
is that they were driven by a desperate, fatal obsession with control, which led them to enact the architecture of stasis. This timeline right here tracks that dark descent, moving from the primal era of the void through the centuries of messy mischief and straight into the age of stasis. This dark age ultimately culminated in the construction of the spiral tower, terribly known as the Jagged Spire. This spire was the ultimate weapon of the strict manual against the unscripted play.
To protect their rigid order, the sorcerers completely betrayed the siblings. They used seals crafted of ancient dusty stone to lock the architects of chaos away forever. And the ancient scrolls describe this so vividly, you can almost picture the sheer desperation of it. Imagine the vibrant, living ink of the siblings frantically attempting to slip through the cracks, pressing their immense, unbridled power against that cold, dead, unyielding stone, only to be forced back inch by the suffocating weight of absolute law.
Their ultimate goal was brutal, but simple. They needed to permanently silence the mocking laugh of the wit, to starve the hunger, and to completely bind the small. They genuinely believed that only by preventing these unpredictable whims from existing could they preserve the strictly controlled logical foundations of their civilization.
The Jagged Spire became a permanent gilded cage. It successfully isolated the architects of chaos from a world that had become entirely obsessed with rigid perfection. The architecture of stasis was officially secured, but man, it came at a terrible, terrible price.
Section 4. The Tragic Loss of Wonder.
Looking at the tragic aftermath of this suppressed history, we can really see the grim exchange the High Sorcerers forced upon the realm. Just look at the world before compared to the world after. In the world before, we had a flexible fabric of reality, surreal playhouses, and the vibrant living ink. But in the world after, we're left with the unyielding architecture of stasis, gilded cages, and a state of what they called unqualified repose. They literally traded away fundamental magic, messy mischief, and pure wonder in return for a sterile, uncompromising, and totally lifeless order.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to end our explainer today. We live right now in the legacy of those high sorcerers. But looking back at the suppressed history, we really have to ask ourselves, is the unqualified repose of our supposedly civilized logical world actually just a permanent invisible prison? Was the defeat of chaos truly a victory for humanity? Or was it simply the death of our freedom? Think about that the next time you feel the urge to break the rules. Thank you so much for joining me, and remember to keep questioning the history you've been taught.